Mr. Speaker, a recent study completed by 15 industry participants outlined the true cost to Albertans for the NDP's ideologically motivated coal phase-out. Accelerating the phase-out comes with a price tag of $4 to $8 billion, almost as high as our ballooning deficit, and Albertans want answers. We know this government has trouble understanding the unintended consequences of their misguided policies. We saw it in Bill 6, we're seeing it with PPA lawsuits, and now with accelerated coal phase-out. To the Minister of Energy, did the government complete a comprehensive impact study, economic impact study, before pulling the pin on yet another irresponsible NDP world grenade?
Thank you, honourable member. The Minister of Environment and Parks.
Well, you know, Mr. Speaker, there is a cost to doing nothing on coal-fired emissions, and that cost shows up in our emergency rooms, Mr. Speaker, and it shows up in lost productivity, and it shows up in the health of the very young and the very old, Mr. Speaker, and that is why we have taken the action that we have, Mr. Speaker, again, with a Made in Alberta plan that will ensure a just transition and no unnecessary stranding of assets, Mr. Speaker. We are doing it because the science behind the health effects of coal-fired emissions is as settled as the science of climate change, and both are real, Mr. Speaker.
For supplemental.
Economic evidence-based study indeed. Mr. Speaker, given that in order to keep up with the demand for electricity, renewable resources need to be phased in as quickly as coal is phased out, and given that the NDP government will rely heavily on private sector investors to meet renewable targets, the same company the Premier publicly vilifies daily. Given that you've invested in turning public perception against taxpayer-owned companies despite their commitments to a stable power grid and the communities they serve, and now you're asking them for partnerships and billions in investments, again to the minister, simply put, do you regret torching those very bridges of trust and investor confidence in front and behind you?
Thank you, honourable member. The honourable minister.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And on this topic of the investment appetite in the renewable space, I will quote Calgary Economic Development President Mary Moran, who said, as investment in renewable energy in Canada is growing rapidly, Alberta has been largely on the sideline in this key part of the future energy supply. So we are pleased to see policy that provides the long-term certainty and stability that encourages global and local companies to invest, Mr. Speaker. This is a plan that plays to the best parts of Alberta's competitive electricity market while ensuring that we are staging the phase-in of renewables and also natural gas in order to replace the aging coal.
Minister, second supplemental.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. That's not what I heard yesterday from the CED Economic Outlook people and the stakeholders I met there. Given the unemployment rate continues to rise across the province, hitting double digits in Calgary, which was a big issue yesterday, and given that a new punitive carbon tax will hit Alberta families January 1st when they can least afford it, and given that we simply need to look to Ontario to see how ideological policies hurt families on fixed incomes the most with increased power bills, and given you know accelerated coal phase-out will hurt these very families and Albertans, knowing that you do not have their backs, when will you stop pursuing the NDP worldview and finally start being a premier for all Albertans?
Minister, member of Economic Development.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I'll happily direct the member to look at the Alberta Jobs Plan, which I released on Monday, which talks about, Mr. Speaker, the fact that this year Alberta is poised to have record investment in capital investment in manufacturing, in non-oil and gas, in oil and gas. $28 billion will be invested this year. And as well, at this very same meeting that the member attended, they also talked about how that there are many economists that are saying that Alberta is turning the corner and that our economy, there's positive projections for next year's outlook. We've had 3 months of growth.
Thank you, honourable minister.